A senior Israeli official says that Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to an immediate ceasefire. U.S. officials, along with two sources from Hezbollah, have also confirmed the ceasefire to Reuters. Now, it comes as Lebanon's health minister says at least 47 people were killed after a series of Israeli airstrikes. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Hezbollah will pay a heavy price following the deaths of 4 IDF soldiers. Well, the fighting in Lebanon is seen as a threat to the ceasefire deal signed this week by the U.S. and Iran. The first talks outlined in that agreement were set to begin today in Switzerland, but have been postponed. U.S. President Trump and the Iranian foreign minister have traded blows on social media less than 2 days after the deal was signed. I spoke earlier to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Tania Krämer. She told me more about reports of an Israeli-Hezbollah ceasefire.
There's little information to this, or little official confirmation at all from, we didn't hear yet from the defense minister or from Israel's prime minister, although he had come out earlier paying condolences in a statement to the 4 Israeli soldiers that were killed overnight, and also praising the IDF carrying out attacks in Lebanon overnight. But we are hearing here in the Israeli media that this ceasefire is gone into effect at 4 p.m. local time, and obviously we now need to see whether this will hold, because this came after an escalation over the past 24 hours between Israel and Hezbollah. 4 Israeli soldiers were killed. The Israeli military said they had carried out attacks on over 150 targets, and also we're hearing from the Lebanese health ministry that at least 47 people were killed in Lebanon. Now, we could understand from sources here that this is a formula that goes quiet for quiet. So if Israel doesn't attack, Hezbollah won't attack, and vice versa. We've seen that before. But it doesn't mean, from what we understand, that Israel actually will withdraw from these, what they describe as security zones. These are zones. The IDF published a map last night showing where the Israeli military is currently deployed. It's about 10 kilometers inside Lebanon, where the Israeli military occupies the territory. So they won't withdraw from that as part of the ceasefire, but it's very important because Iran has said the fighting needs to stop as part of this MOU. So that means, that needs to happen for this to move forward.
Tania, thank you very much for bringing us up to date there. Our correspondent Tania Krämer in Jerusalem.
And joining me now is Siavush Randjbar-Daemi. He's a senior lecturer in modern Middle Eastern history at the University of St. Andrews. His work focuses on the evolution of the Iranian state and political authority in the Islamic Republic. It's good to have you with us this evening. The agreement between the U.S. and Iran, in the last 24 hours, it has been tested by fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Now we've got reports that Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to a ceasefire. In your opinion, is this a sustainable way to peace?
No, but we have to get used to it. I don't think that the next 60 days will be smooth sailing. I think we will have a lot of stop and starts due to the situation in Lebanon. We've been through this process of ceasefires being announced and then renounced, if you want, by renewed fighting, skirmishes. Israel does not seem, as your correspondent noted, to be willing to withdraw from the sizable amounts of Lebanese territory it has occupied in the last couple of months. That was one of the Iranian requests. So at some point, there will have to be a balance between what goes on in Lebanon and advancing the negotiations with Iran and the US, which are, of course, related to different matters, the Iranian nuclear program primarily.
How much control does Washington really have over Israel's next move?
Well, I think that Israel clearly will use Lebanon as a spoiler. It is the ace in the hole, if you want, that Netanyahu has to influence in some way the Iran-US talks. That can happen in a variety of manners. If news emerges that the agreement tilts towards concessions for Iran, particularly the nuclear issue, then Israel could maybe ratchet up the tensions in Lebanon to steer it back towards an arrangement that it seems it finds more suitable and amenable. I don't think that Israel will heed to the Iranian demands, which are not just, as I said, a ceasefire, but also withdrawal from occupied Lebanese territory. And of course, we also have to bear in mind that, of course, ceasefire in Lebanon means an end to the activities of Hezbollah as well. And Hezbollah has shown some prowess in attacking Israeli forces. Just today, 4 Israeli soldiers dead, which is quite a high toll. So the situation there, I think, remains very restive and complicated.
Israeli officials have signaled that they are worried that Iran will use money that's being freed up, unfrozen assets from the deal with the U.S. to increase its financial support for proxies such as Hezbollah. Let me ask you, why would Iran not do that?
Well, Iran clearly is investing a lot of political and probably economic capital in Hezbollah, as we can see. It's such a cornerstone of its demands. Intriguingly, if you've noticed, the memorandum of understanding says nothing about Palestine, for example, despite the fact that Palestine has been always a battle cry for the Islamic Republic for the past 4 or 5 decades. But of course, there's so much emphasis and so much effort that Iran is putting on Lebanon. So clearly, Iran is making a strategic decision here. It is not just rhetoric. Hezbollah is the last element standing of what we used to call the axis of resistance, if you want. So Iran is very careful to prevent a further weakening of Hezbollah and assist Hezbollah holding the current ground to the extent it can against Israel. So clearly, this will mean political but also economic capital where possible.
You know, critics of U.S. and Israeli policy say that military pressure on Iran has failed and that diplomacy is happening only because force reached its limits. Is that the real lesson in all of this?
Well, if you look at historically the way Iran has agreed to major international deals or agreements to bring an end to important elements, for example, the Iran-Iraq War in 1988, nuclear deal of a decade ago, and then this one, there's always an internal economic element, namely that Iran needs to accede to the deal because it is in a tough bind. It was like this in 1988. It was like this 10 years ago because of sanctions. Iran has declared itself that there's a $300 billion reconstruction bill. And clearly that has an important emphasis in the memorandum of understanding. A couple of days ago, Ghalibaf, the chief Iranian negotiator, said that it's time to move from the battlefield to economic reconstruction. There are people who are advancing the point that the Iranian nuclear program in the past 20 years has had a lot of cost and very little gain. And the recent Iranian defense, if you want, in the past 40 days has been through non-nuclear means. So there is, I think, in Iran a recognition that they need to move beyond the battlefield and the war to focus on economic reconstruction. That can only come through diplomatic negotiation.
Siavush Randjbar-Daemi, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And joining me now is Arash Azizi, a historian and lecturer at Yale University. Arash has also written several books about Iran, including What Iranians Want, Women, Life, Freedom. Arash, it's good to have you with us. Good to have you back on the program. You know, we have seen a lot of moving parts this week. We had this memorandum of understanding that was signed by the U.S. and Iran, the first step to ending their war. And today, a ceasefire was agreed upon by Israel and the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. And both of these agreements are very fragile. Do you think that they are the right steps to a lasting peace?
Well, there is something between fragile and a lasting peace. I mean, I don't think they're so fragile as to break like next week, but obviously, you know, they're also not really big peace frameworks. They're really a way to just keep the talks going on for the next few weeks, next 60 days. So I think both sides will overcome these hiccups like the attacks on Lebanon and all that to keep the talks going. But whether they can reach that bigger goal of, lifting the sanctions on Iran in exchange for enough limits on its nuclear program that could satisfy the United States, that remains to be seen. And of course, the antagonism and hostility between Iran and Israel is not something that's going to go away anytime soon.
Why do you think Hezbollah and Israel said yes to a new ceasefire now? Was there possibly pressure coming from both Washington and Tehran?
Yeah, there certainly was pressure from both sides, but also militarily, there's not a whole lot either side can really advance. Hezbollah is very hapless. There has very little cards to play. It's really just fighting for its survival, and it's sort of keeping its place in Lebanon in any way that it can. It's in a very precarious position. Even the Lebanese Shia as a whole have sort of are a new position of precarity in Hezbollah, in Lebanon, especially if they're seen to be supporting Hezbollah. Many blame the conflict with Israel on the Shia and on Hezbollah. And Israel also knows that it doesn't have an easy way of doing something about that, and it doesn't want the wrath of President Trump for blaming them for breaking down the MOU. So that explains why they accepted the Qatari-mediated ceasefire this morning.
The U.S.-Iran deal establishes a 60-day window to tackle issues that were not addressed in the deal this week. I know that you have said that this is a tactical pause. What do you mean with that?
Well, that means that they wanted the war to end. It ended in this MOU, which has pretty good terms for Iran. All Iran has to do is to go back to before the war, where it wasn't closing the Strait of Hormuz, but it will get something it didn't have before the war, i.e. release of its assets, i.e. Relaxation of the ban on its oil sales, sanctions on its oil sales. So, then there will be opportunity to talk. Now, there are many in the Iranian leadership who do want trade with the United States. They are pretty excited probably to hear Vice President Vance speak so brazenly against Israel, for example, and so positively of Iran. I mean, now that President Trump has repeatedly praised the Iranian leadership, Vice President Vance has said, they talk to us like a normal country, just as he criticized Israel. So they have something positive going on for them. The question is whether they can take that leap of faith to go into economic relations with the United States and use that to relax this kind of siege that the country has been in. And there's been many false starts like that before. From the 1990s, many examples from Rafsanjani and Clinton all the way to Rouhani and Obama and Biden and Rouhani and Biden and Raisi and now. So one should be quite not get excited too quickly about it, but there are chances for transformative changes.
Iran is counting on sanctions relief, oil money flowing again. Its proxies, such as Hezbollah, are still intact. The regime in Tehran appears stronger post-war than they were pre-war. Do you agree with that?
Regime strength is always kind of hard to measure. It depends exactly what we mean by it. I think economically the country is in a much worse shape. I think some of its assets have been seriously harmed. I also think we shouldn't just compare it to previous to war, but like to 4 or 5 years ago, where Iran controlled 4 Arab capitals and boasted about it. The axis of resistance is severely weakened if we compare it to that. And also the other thing that is very interesting is that, let's say they using this strength to get better terms, but these terms are for deals with the United States, and these deals, if they go ahead and if they lead to expansion of ties, themselves will really undermine the regime's anti-American, anti-Western ideology. So it's a bind the regime is in some ways.
Arash Azizi, good to get your take on things. We appreciate your time on this Friday night. Thank you.